Hey friends, so it just occurred to me that, while I was being confused about video quality, like should I record on this, which is my phone, or should I record on my camera, which is a lot better quality, but I don't yet have all the gadgets I need to do it extra efficiently. It just occurred to me that I could use the difference in quality as part of my thing. Like the medium is the message, right? So like I can make videos that are less polished and less certain with a lower quality device, which is cool. And anyway, so I was on Twitter earlier, right? And I was scrolling as usual, as one does. And I saw a tweet that kind of annoyed me. And I realized in that moment that, hey, I might as well use the opportunity. Because it's funny because earlier in the day, I was thinking, I think I'm done making videos about vision for now and I would like to do something else, but I don't really have anything particular in mind. And I do find that when I try to force myself to come up with something to talk about or write about, it always feels fake and forced. It's like I need the emotional energy from some kind of reaction, and that kind of propels me on what I'm doing. And so I was scrolling through my timeline and I found a tweet that annoyed me a little bit. I agreed with it a little bit and it annoyed me a little bit, and it made me realize that, hey, I could, instead of trying to squeeze myself into a nuanced position in 280 characters, I might as well talk about it. And that's what I'm going to do. Cool. So the tweet, I don't even want to single out the author, but it's kind of more of an abstract thing, right? The tweet said something like, and so now I'm paraphrasing, so it's not even about the tweet anymore. It's about my reaction to the tweet or my thoughts on the tweet. My thoughts on the tweet. And it was about taboos, right? It said, secular societies have arbitrary taboos while religious societies have objective taboos. And already that kind of irks me because, all taboos are arbitrary, and like you could say that religious taboos are even more arbitrary. I mean, everything is arbitrary to some degree, right? There's nothing in the human realm, in human affairs, that is not arbitrary. Like, and if you want to get really nerdy about it, you go into science and you say physics is not arbitrary, but then you dig deeper and you're like, oh, you get into quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics is strange stuff. But I don't want to talk about quantum mechanics. I want to talk about how people organize themselves. I want to talk about taboos and culture, right? And I feel like someone who has had experience navigating taboos, and I have always been very curious about taboos. And people are particularly bad at talking about taboos because your concept of what is taboo is, in some sense, it frames your thinking. Like you think within the constraints of what you think is acceptable and what is not acceptable. And you may have some ideas of, and again, it may not be you, like different people have different degrees of, different people have different relationships with this, right? And some people are more comfortable identifying and examining taboos than others. And it's always easier to identify like what seems like a silly taboo in a different society, right? So like when you see a country with a monarchy and the people love their king and they have the blasphemy law, not blasphemy, so blasphemy is related, right? But what's the law against kings? There's a phrase like something majestic or whatever. Least majestic, is it? I'm not sure. But like just, bad mouthing the king in some places in the world will get you killed or, beaten up or whatever and not by the law, but by culture, by people who feel gravely offended that you have insulted their king. And, if you live in a culture where there is no monarchy, that would seem very parochial. I learned that word from David Deutsch. It would seem very parochial. It seem outdated. It would seem wrong-headed or whatever. That's easy. It's always easy to identify what's taboo in another culture that's a silly and arbitrary taboo. But we also always simultaneously have taboos in our own society. And yeah, man, very often if you want to understand a culture, one of the fastest ways you can understand it is by figuring out the taboos. It's like if you want to understand how a car works, right? You can try and read about cars from scratch, but one of the fastest ways to develop an understanding that is useful is Google like common car problems, right? And you go to like a mechanic's website and they'll say, oh, people forget to change the oil. And then you'll be like, oh, what happens when you don't change the oil? Oh, when you don't change the oil, this happens. What happens when this, when your battery, this thing happens to your battery? What happens when your carburetor or something? I'm not a car guy, but you can piece together an understanding of how a car works by examining the ways in which the car doesn't work, or how things fall apart. And if you reverse engineer how things fall apart, you develop a sense of what needs to work to keep the thing running, and that gives you like the 80-20, the least bit of information that explains the most about what's going on. And I think taboos in culture kind of function that way. And now, what is culture, right? It operates at so many layers, right? There's and it goes all the way down to the individual. Like, individuals have things about themselves that they themselves do not question, because at some level, and maybe the word taboo is not relevant, not so appropriate when you're talking about individual, but functionally it's the same thing. It's this sense of, I can't question my marriage, or I can't question my job, or I can't question my political tribal affiliation. I can't question my nationality. There are certain things that I consider sacrosanct, that I don't even consider. Do you get it? That's the thing that I'm trying to convey in this video. It's not that the person considers it and then decides that they don't want to think about it. It's that they don't consider it to begin with. And the things that you don't consider, the things that you don't see, they become the invisible walls that kind of shape. They become your kind of psychic prison, right? And it isn't, the thing about questioning things is you don't necessarily have to disrespect something to question it. That's my belief. I believe that you can question something respectfully. I'm reminded now of a very funny fight that I had on Tumblr. I used to be on Tumblr with somebody. So somebody retweeted, reposted, reblogged. On Tumblr you reblog. Somebody reblogged illustration of Ganesha, the Hindu deity, and it's the art of it is very it's like a stoner image, right? It's like I thought it was cool. It was like those psychedelic colors and everything, and somebody was upset about it. Somebody was offended, and they quote tweeted it with something like, "Oh, these stoner white bros appropriating our culture and disrespecting the sacred." And I was raised in a Hindu household. I actually have a Ganesh right there, right? And I was raised in a Hindu household. I went to the temple. I live in Singapore, which is a country that I would say, relative to a lot of other places, has a respect for different cultural beliefs, different ethnicities, different religions, so on and so forth. There's temples and there's festivals, there's national holidays, and I was not upset or offended by that portrayal of Ganesh. I thought it was cool. And the person who, and I said so, right? And the person who saw that, they got very upset. And they had all kinds of interesting assumptions about me. First of all, they assumed I was white. I'm like, nah. Then they assumed that I must be trying to impress the whites. I live in a country where there are basically no negligible white population. The majority race in Singapore is ethnic Chinese. And yeah, so I care very little about, I don't need to impress white stoner bros to get by. Like, my life is fine, And then they said, oh, you have been, if you're not white and you're not trying to impress the whites, then you must be like self-loathing in some way. You must be like trying to kind of like you're doing this childish rebellion. You're hating on your own culture for shits and giggles. And I disagree. I don't even think that, so like consider it this way. I would say I'm kind of agnostic-ish. I wouldn't say I'm religious in a very conventional sense, but I wouldn't say I'm atheist either. I have a respect and love for spirituality and symbols and ideas and all of those things. And I would say that I think more highly of Ganesh, the idea, than that person does. You know, that person seems to feel that a different interpretation of that symbol weakens this, somehow hurts the symbol. I don't see it that way. I think it strengthens the symbol. And I will say not every single representation is necessarily respectful, right? Like there are ways that you can respect and elevate an idea, and there are ways that you can disrespect an idea. And simultaneously, you know, the worst thing that can happen to an idea is that it gets completely ignored and it dies from lack of use, right? But yeah, I felt that, you know, you can have contemporary experimentations with an idea that nonetheless weave that idea into something potentially profound. And you know, that's a very long conversation, and that's very layered, and how you do it is very important. And you know, Tumblr might not have been the right medium to have that conversation. And but yeah, you know, that kind of, I feel, represents a lot of interesting things. So another thing that happens sometimes is discussions about capitalism and socialism, and you know, so ideological stuff, right? And a thing that trips some people up is that I will say simultaneously that I think capitalism is kind of the best system we have for accomplishing our goals at a species level scale. And I also think capitalism is not good enough. And this kind of confuses people. They're like, oh, either you're not a real capitalist, you're actually a socialist in disguise, or you know, it's like, oh, how dare you simp for this capitalist gods. I'm like, you know, in both of those worldviews implies this very it's so sad to me, actually. It's like it's whether, so it's like, you know, another way I would frame it is like when you demonize something, it's the inverse of pedestalizing it, right? It's like you make it out to be so much worse than a normal thing could be. Like you're no longer engaging with it as an idea. So it's like there is the world of ideas. Nah, I can't really explain that in words right now. But like what I'm trying to say, it's like there are so the people who okay, here's an example. I saw like what's her name, Azalia Banks, I think. She posted on Parler, I don't know, some whatever. She had some post that was something like AOC single-handedly ruined New York City. And I'm like, do you think that lowly of New York City that it could be ruined by one congresswoman? Really? Like the city's been around for hundreds of years, right? And it has so many things going on. And so you see what I'm saying? It's like you elevate your opponent by giving them so much power over you, right? And in a way, sometimes that's what people want. So people want dramatic heroes and dramatic villains and you know, effectively archangels and archdemons to it's like they want that drama, and they don't like the idea that maybe we're all just people, and maybe we're all just figuring stuff out, and maybe so on and so forth. And it's very interesting to encounter that because, you know, in a way, I feel like that's the real I don't want to say atheism, but it's the real kind of free thinking that people who claim to be atheists or people who claim to be philosophers or whatever, is like, it doesn't matter what label you choose, but when ideas get you so worked up one way or the other, so whether it's someone insulting the thing you love, or you know, so there's that I'm reminded now of, I think Zizek had a quote about how the only real fundamentalists are like the Amish and the Zen Buddhists, like people who just, they know what's good, right? They believe that they know what's good, and they don't have to persuade anybody else of it. They just go off and do their own thing, and they are convinced of the kind of superiority or correctness of their worldview, and they leave everyone else alone. Like they don't need to impose their values on anyone else. Because if your values are good, why should you have to force them on anyone else? You know, like wouldn't people upon casual exposure to it, recognize its worth. And yeah, I know you can go into a bunch of details about that, but it's like, yeah, you can't coerce someone into being a better person, because what they learn from it is that coercion is how you get things done. So I think Zizek's point was that like the kind of radical terrorist groups, like they don't really believe what they claim to be believing, right? What they want is power. They don't actually believe in the thing that they're preaching. And so that's I guess I would end on that. That's a general thing to observe and examine. Like what do people really believe? Like they say a bunch of stuff, but how do they conduct themselves? That's really the thing to examine. Okay, I'm done for now. Bye bye.